The Arizona Cardinals training camp is in 12 days, July 25th at State Farm Stadium. And we're going to talk about the biggest storylines heading into camp. Kyler Murray posted the other day. He said, bet the over. Came out with a whole collage of him working out with the guys, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson. Their win totals at 6.5 right now. Their odds to win the NFC West are at plus 1,300. Ben, what, in your mind, is the biggest storyline, biggest thing that you're going to look forward to, look at for the Cardinals training camp in just 12 days?
I think the biggest storyline, and it's really not talked about enough, because I think we just expect this player to be awesome. There's a few different storylines. We'll get into them in just a second. The Trey Benson, James Conner thing is interesting given James Conner's injuries. The cornerback situation is interesting. The pass rusher situation could really ruin this team from any promise that we think they have this year. But I think the biggest one is Paris Johnson Jr., who was electric last year at right tackle. His original position that he was drafted out of Iowa State was left tackle, and he was awesome there. But they moved him to right tackle. DJ Humphries took over the left tackle duties. I am curious if there's a report out there, maybe his feet are a little slow, it's not great, he's not moving over to it as perfectly as we wanted him to. If the Cardinals don't have a left tackle, you could pretty much put a fork in the season if the left tackle isn't great and if the pass rushing isn't great. You can't protect the quarterback, and you can't go get the other team's quarterback. I think he's going to be fine, because in the era of the NFL where you just need two bookend tackles now, is that something for you that you're concerned, or at least have a keen eye on, of what Paris Johnson Jr. is going to be at camp?
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's something, though, he's familiar with, and he's going to start to get familiar with as the season rolls on. I wouldn't be shocked if Paris Johnson Jr. ends up playing a game or two, not the entire game, but it starts to get reps in preseason just to get familiar with it. But the left tackle position is way more important than the right tackle position, especially for a mobile quarterback like Kyler Murray. It's his blind side. The left side is more prone for him to get injured on his backside and stuff like that. And for Kyler Murray, he likes to roll out to his right. It's tough for a guy that short, especially in the pocket, to roll out to his left, and especially with some of these elite pass rushers. I agree with you. I think Paris Johnson Jr. is going to be interesting too. And you got to mention, it's the new offensive line as a whole. I mean, Froholt comes back another year, but you've got right now, I'm looking at the depth chart, they got left guard Isaiah Adams as the starting guard, who's going to be a rookie. I mean, the left guard position is pretty thin right now. I think that side, maybe Paris Johnson Jr. is going to have to hold. And the other side, Will Hernandez, can he stay healthy? And then you add Jonah Williams as the right tackle. He's going to be coming into a new system. And, he used to block for Joe Burrow, but is he going to get familiar with blocking like a guy like Kyler Murray who likes to be dynamic?
Yeah, we're not used to a storyline in the offensive line that is more or less not usually a big deal. Because if Paris Johnson Jr. moves over seamlessly, like I believe he's going to do, but it's still one of those things where if we see the story of, he's getting there, he's a little slow, I'm not so sure. We might have to move this back and flip these bookends, and then we have real issues. But we're not really used to that, because last year the offensive line was the best we had seen in a few years. So if that isn't an issue, the Cardinals are set up to have one of the top 10 offenses in the NFL. But, again, if it's not, it could all come crashing down, because this offense is going to carry this team this year, not the defense. We're just hoping they can have a bend but don't break defense. If you have a defense that isn't working and a left tackle that is a revolving door of guys that you're trying out, it spills serious issues for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the second story that I also thought was really interesting, and we talked about it just a second ago, James Conner and Trey Benson. James Conner had his first 1,000-yard rushing season last year, despite how productive we just think off the top of our head that James Conner is. Only one 1,000-yard season. With the injuries, you just have to book it that he's going to miss 4 games this year. Do you think there is any scenario Trey Benson doesn't steal the job, but immediately comes out of the gate as a 50-50 split with James Conner? We saw how electric Trey Benson was with Florida State. Is that something that could happen?
Oh, I agree. I think Trey Benson and what he did with that Florida State team, especially when Jordan Travis was out, he was carrying the running game. I thought during the Florida State season he had some crucial runs down the stretch, especially a third down back, and he's got fresh legs. big-ass legs for Trey Benson. And there might be a situation, too, where he gets some more time just to preserve James Conner. I think they go 50-50. I don't know about at the start of the season. I think maybe he's like 60-40, 70-30 to kind of get Trey Benson familiar with. But he comes from a program in Florida State where Norvell, pro system, something that he's familiar with. For the Arizona Cardinals, that he's familiar with Florida State, that'll transition for the Arizona Cardinals. But with what Pensing wants to do, with how much he wants to run the football, and by the way, them having a better running game and focusing more on the running game is only going to be a better relief for Kyler Murray, who's a fan of it. I don't want to have to run 20 times in 2020 or 2019 for them to win a football game. Remember that stat a couple years ago with Cliff Kingsbury? If Kyler Murray didn't ran for 25 times a game, they were like 2-6, 2-7, or something like that. So
they would always blame Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and I think for Trey Benson too. I think James Conner is a better a pass catcher than Trey Benson. I think that's something that he's going to have to establish too. But I mean, a guy we don't talk about a lot too. I'm a fan of Michael Carter. I think is in the equation too in terms of the running game and what he can do in the passing game too. How do you see Conner and Benson?
Yeah, the Conner and Benson thing. It's hard because I ask you, hey, do you think you could be right at the start 50-50? I don't think you spend as high as a pick as you did on a running back if you don't immediately basically agree with the fact that you're just going to run this guy into the ground, which I think is the perfect way for to get a running back on this team.
And it's not a bad thing to play two running backs. There's a lot of teams that play two running backs, especially with 17 games. You have to have two running backs.
The fantasy football idea of a workhorse bell, there's like 5 of those in the NFL now. Christian McCaffrey, maybe Saquon Barkley this year. But for the most part, it's going to be by committee. And I think the Trey Benson, James Conner 1-2 punch could be a top 5 rushing offense in the NFL. But, I mean, there's that. And then, lastly, the story of, is the pass rushing going to be that much of an issue that allows them to not be a playoff team? Because I have this team as a playoff team. I think this offense on its own is going to carry them to 9 wins. But if they can't get to the pass rusher, I mean, there's going to be games where, like Daniel Jones last year, picked them apart. Daniel freaking Jones picked them apart last year. And there's not really any other guy on this defensive line that I'm super confident in. Where's your level of concern?
I think it's still a concern. Last year when you look at the Arizona Cardinals, they were third to last. Can't talk today in terms of sacks. They only below 2 sacks a game. And for people out there that say, oh, it's not a big deal, they got a secondary to back them up and stuff like that. No, there's not a lot of secondary room for this Arizona Cardinals team. And if you're trusting Budda Baker to come downhill and make a lot of tackles, any safety in the NFL, especially with these running backs and the dynamic weapons of the Tyreek Hills of the world or, the Romeo Dobbs and all these dynamic wide receivers, the Jackson Smith and Jigwas of the world, it's just not going to happen. So I agree with you, Ben. I do like, though, that they got some veteran guys that have played meaningful snaps and have been around, like the Nichols and the Joneses in the world. But my biggest concern for this team is going to be, what are we going to see in Zaven Collins in a contract year? Is Darius Robinson, he's a first-round pick, people. He's a first-round pick. I have a hard time believing. You said Trey Benson paying all that money and being a second-round pick. I have a hard time believing that Darius Robinson's not going to be starting or getting at least 70% of the snaps right away for the Arizona Cardinals. And then my third question is, are the second-year guys on this defense, specifically the pass rush, going to step up? The B.J. Ojolaris of the world, the Owen Papos, the inside, the Mac Wilsons that you signed, the Kazir Whites, can he stay healthy for the entire season? And I think that applies to the pass rush too, because with this 4-3 front that they like to use, the linebackers like to go in there and pass rush too. So I think for me, it's going to be, can the second-year guys step up? Can the Zaven Collins of the world step up in his second year in the defense? And what are we going to see from a first-round pick in year one?
You make a really compelling argument.
Thank you.
Because you forget. Even someone like myself that is literally all sports 24/7, which can drive my wife insane, by the way. It's a thing where Marvin Harrison Jr., just remember first-round pick Marvin Harrison Jr., they had a second first-round pick this year. They took Darius Robinson. Now,
people forget it.
Now, he's an interior guy, right? He's more for the horrendous run stopping that the Cardinals were last year. But can he add pressure up the middle, which is far more valuable?
I think he can be an edge rusher, too.
He is a hybrid guy, but he's mostly, at Missouri,
agreed,
was a defensive tackle, was a nose guy. But it's more important because if he's playing there, if you can get pressure up the middle that causes a world of hurt for quarterbacks. Tom Brady says he used to hate it. He used to hate not being able to step up in the pocket. So Darius Robinson's the next factor. If Darius Robinson is 80% of his potential this year, he's a first-round pick. That's a lot of potential. And B.J. Ojulari is taking that next step. He's an 11-sack guy. This is a serious playoff team. And that's how wide the scale is. If the pass rush is decent, they're going to be for sure a playoff team. If it's not, they could maybe only win 7 games. That's how big of a storyline that is. So that's why I'm curious in camp what exactly is going to come from that.
And then my last storyline, I know last year's rookie class was good, and I think in the second year we're going to see some dynamic players, but I think this year's rookie class has something special about it. Now, with the Marvin Harrison Juniors of the world being at the top, yeah, it's going to be a headline and stuff like that. But I think there's certain guys, even the Tip Rymans of the world, and what he can do in the run game blocking. You mentioned Trey Benson. Max Melton at cornerback,
Yep.
I think is a really intriguing. I think a guy that no one's talking about. But when you look at what he did last, if you're at home right now or if you're on the road, type in Rutgers, Ohio State, and look what Max Melton did to Marvin Harrison Jr. last year. I think this guy is a slam dunk pick, and he's going to probably be the starting cornerback for the Arizona Cardinals. What are your thoughts about the rookie class?
Listed as the starter right now. He's a little short. He's 5'11", but Max Melton out of Rutgers. I'm not going to act like I knew a ton about Rutgers football before we started this conversation, but when the Cardinals drafted him, I looked into it. This guy was a shutdown corner for Rutgers. So I expect him to be instantly a plug-and-play guy. Now, it's ridiculous for me to say Patrick Peterson 2.0, but can he be as good as Sean Murphy-Bunting? And if they do, you know how much better of an upgrade Max Melton could potentially be over Marco Wilson, who couldn't cover legitimately anyone
Amen.
Or anything?
Amen.
Who still thinks it's the Cardinals' fault with Jonathan Gannon and company, who was misusing him. No, Marco Wilson was awful. So now when you're not starting him, that's a positive. That's an addition by subtraction. Sean Murphy-Bunting, a real cornerback, 2 or 3 guy who's been around the block. I'm excited for this rookie class, especially Max Melton. You hit it right on the head.